Hi, I hope that you're doing well. My name is Bige Kahraman Alper. I'm an associate professor of finance and economics at the University of Oxford, the Saïd Business School. I'd like to thank the conference organizers for putting together this program and extending an invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. As you can see from my title, today I'm going to talk about corporate social responsibility. So let's begin. So as you all know, CSR, corporate social responsibility, is on the rise. It has become an important aspect of corporate strategy over the past few years. Many corporations nowadays spend millions of dollars on community philanthropy and environmental and employee satisfaction programs. And in fact, according to the 2009 McKinsey survey, an overwhelming majority of CFOs and several professionals nowadays report that they embrace these CSR initiatives. Despite all these developments taking place in the private sector, in the academic world, we still do not know the answer to the question of, what are the financial implications of these initiatives? I use the term CSR and ES interchangeably in the rest of this talk. So what are the financial implications of ES initiatives? Do these initiatives, do they have pecuniary or non-pecuniary motives? So there has been quite some interest in the academic world to this question. There are new papers coming up. But despite that, we still do not know the answer. The evidence is quite mixed. There are a number of papers which find positive effects, and there are a number of papers which do not find any association whatsoever. And there are also some papers which find negative effects. So you might be wondering why the results are so different from different studies. Well, this can be a long discussion. I don't want to get into these details, but just want to give you a general idea. I think the main difficulty is the empirical challenges in this type of studies. The main empirical challenge is the measurement difficulty. In order to assess the value of the CSR or ES initiatives, one needs to be able to compare firms which take those kind of initiatives versus the firms which do not. And to do so, then one needs to be able to measure these things. And there are a number of commercial databases which provide detailed information about companies, ES initiatives, their ES scoring. They also have some scoring systems. But there has been recently, as been shown by also academic papers, that there are some concerns about these commercial databases. One is that there are important coverage issues. And second, there are some inconsistencies across different data providers, which then raise concerns about the credibility. And of course, in part related to this, there is an important information asymmetry between the company and the investors, which then makes it very difficult to price the value of these initiatives by the market participants. Okay, so we aim to contribute to this debate in this paper, and to do so with my co-authors Ellen He and Michelle Laura, we do the following. So different from the previous paper, take a completely different approach, and we look at the shareholder proposals on CSR, on ES issues. So as you know, shareholder proposals basically is a form of shareholder activism, is a channel through which shareholders can express their views on ES issues. So why we take this approach, we believe that there are important advantages. One is that this approach, as you will see later in this talk, we do not need to rely on ratings and these commercial databases. So this is a big plus for our study. And second, this approach, we believe it is more direct as it allows us to examine the views and the incentives of agents with skin in the game, so which are basically shareholders themselves. It's difficult to refute the idea that the shareholders, the majority of shareholders will want to do something which will, destroy their own value, their own financial value. So what do we do? So we basically start by documenting a new fact, and then we dig deeper into it. So the new fact that we document is that, which is a little bit surprising, that virtually none of the ES proposals pass. So we have detailed data in shareholder proposals going back to 2004. And when you look at the pass rate in ES proposals versus non-ES proposals, which typically focus on governance issues, you see a huge discrepancy. There's a striking contrast in the sense that the non-conventional ES proposals, the pass rate is generally about 30% in the overall sample, but for ES proposals, this is almost zero. So then of course we dig deeper into this and to understand why, and we also ask, are there important implications of these patterns in this data? So based on Benabou and Tirol, we offer two competing hypotheses. So our H0 is that these ES initiatives, they never pass, but it must be because they have non-pecuniary motives, right? So the majority of shareholders basically reject these proposals. And our H1 is alternative hypothesis that, well, maybe at least there is a group of ES initiatives which are, they're value relevant in the sense that these initiatives could be helpful in reducing the probability of value destroying events related to the ES incidents. But due to agency issues by a group of shareholders, not all, by a group of shareholders, they get close to the pass rate, which is about 50%, but not enough to go over the threshold. And as a consequence, they fail. And once they fail, then the management has very little incentive to implement this. But since these concerns expressed by a group of shareholders, the ones which suffer from agency issues, contain value, then the degree of support rate can actually contain some information about the future incidents of the firm. So more specifically, what are the testable predictions from H0 and H1 is that under H0, since these proposals are not value relevant, the failed ES proposals are not value relevant, therefore they cannot predict any future events. However, under H1, the degree of support rate in failed ES proposals, specifically the ones with higher support rate, the failed ES proposals with relatively higher support rate, say around 40%, these type of basically support rate can predict the future incidents that the firms might be experiencing over the next few years. Okay, so the data that we use, there are two main data sources. First one is ISS. So ISS data basically gives us detailed information about the proposal content. It allows us to identify, therefore, the ES proposals and the non-ES proposals. And for each proposal, we can observe the support rate, and we also observe information about the sponsor. And in terms of voting, we do not have the votes of every single shareholder, but we have the individual votes by mutual funds, the shareholders which are mutual funds. And this is due to a disclosure requirement that has been introduced in 2003. Although we don't observe the votes by every single shareholder, I must note that the mutual funds, it's a large asset management group. So they're important shareholders in many companies, many publicly traded companies. And of course, the fact that we're able to observe the votes, at least by this large group of shareholders, is a significant improvement over what has been done before. And in addition to the ISS data, we also use data from RepRisk. So the RepRisk data basically allows us to identify specifically the incidents that the incidents that the firm might be experiencing due to ES issues. So this is a very useful data set because it allows us to go beyond just a simple return analysis, but also be able to link those returns that we document to the incidents that the firm is experiencing, and also the nature of the incidents. It's like a really rich data set. They collect detailed information about every single firm by screening over various different public sources in various different languages, and it's available also in data frequency, so which is very useful. And in a typical year, so this is basically the slide here. We're showing the number of ES and non-ES proposals during our sample period in each year. As you can see, in a typical year, roughly about 25% of shareholder proposals are focused on ES issues. So it's basically ES proposals, they are a non-negligible component of the shareholder proposals. And you might be wondering who brings these proposals. And so we, using the detailed information on sponsors, we do a quick analysis, and we find that a large fraction, the The majority of this proposal, put it differently, about 53% are brought in by asset management companies, and the remaining are shared by religious groups and also some others. We categorize as others, which include basically some private individuals, unions, and NGOs. The asset management companies are the ones that are most active, basically. And they can be about various different things. We actually report detailed information about this in the paper, but here just to give you a very quick idea. Well, the type of proposals that are brought in kind of depends a little bit on the characteristics of the sponsor. So if you look at the sponsors, sort of proposal sponsored by asset management companies, we see that report on sustainability and carbon emissions. So these two are the most popular. Well, also in addition to these, the asset management companies also care about social matters. So they want to see companies, anti-bias policies and some human rights matters. Proposals sponsored by religious groups, they are, as perhaps it's not too surprising, they're a little bit more focused on social as opposed to the other ones. And proposals sponsored by the others, again, the social proposal seems to be most popular. And there are also some other things, like, for instance, animal welfare. But as you can see, I mean, the number of proposals that are in by this group is relatively smaller in numbers compared to the other groups. Okay, so what are the main results of our analysis? Our first finding is the following. As I laid out the hypothesis and the testable predictions before, we look at whether the degree of support rate in failed ES proposals predict future company events. And we find that it does. Support rate in failed ES proposals indeed predict subsequent returns and incidents that the firm is experiencing. To be more specific, the ES proposals that didn't pass but received higher support rate, say close to the 50% threshold, these companies have large negative returns stemming from ES incidents over the next few years. So these large negative returns that we find is about an annual alpha of 1.4%, and we find that the ES news count. So this is basically the number of negative news that the firm is experiencing over the next few years. It increases by about nearly 10%, and a more detailed analysis show that all of these negative alphas are realized around those days when there's a negative news is released about the firm. So this provides basically strong support for the alternative hypothesis. And we also do a within firm analysis to address some concerns related to the sample selection and so on and so forth. And we contrast the predictability of support rate in failed ES and failed non-ES proposals within the same firm. And we find that the predictability is only due to ES proposals only. So what we document economically, it is something specific to ES, but also this result shows that the results are not driven by some sample selection. And our second finding, well, the second part of the paper put it differently. We asked basically, why do we observe this result? What is generating it? What is the economic mechanism behind it? And here, well, to make the long story short, we find that distorted incentives by a subset of shareholders, it is the main economic driver behind this result. And you might be wondering, what are those, incentives, distorted incentives? Well, we identified two important ones. One is that we find the shareholder myopia, and the second one is concerns about confronting management. So basically what we find is that the shareholders which are more myopic in the context of mutual funds, this basically corresponds to mutual fund managers who have more impatient capital, who have more impatient investors. So these are the type of managers who reject pretty much all ES proposals. And also the second group is that there are a number of mutual fund managers who are particularly concerned about confronting the management. The reason why sometimes they're concerned about confronting management is that from their point of view, having access to management means having access to information. And so therefore, there are a number of mutual fund companies which will, for instance, they will never, ever almost confront the management in publicly. So we find that these type of companies are basically the ones that are generally rejecting pretty much all ES proposals. So these distorted incentives matter, both of them statistically significant, but from an economic point of view, it seems that the latter concerns about confronting management seems to be more important. And interestingly, when we repeat our predictability analysis just by focusing only on shareholders which do not suffer from these agency problems, these distorted incentives, then we find that the predictability increases by about 2%. It goes up to basically minus 2% as opposed to 1.4. And I'm here talking about in terms of absolute values. I think that's all I'm gonna say today. I just wanted to give you a brief idea about the paper. I hope you enjoyed this recording, and if you're interested in, so please visit my website to download the full paper. Thank you very much for watching.